We're in Mark 14. If you want to go ahead and turn to Mark 14, we'll begin in verse 26. Chapter 14 begins with the healing of wrong book. That's why I couldn't find my place. I was in the wrong book. Yeah. So Mark 14 begins with the scribes and Pharisees, chief priests and scribes, and they have made the determination that Jesus has to die. That's how it opens up. Now what takes place before that is Jesus teaching about the destruction of Jerusalem, and there is this beginning of that where it says that one of the disciples with him says, "Look at all of these great buildings, these fantastic buildings here." And Jesus says, "Yes, but there will not be one stone left upon another." I think that's chapter 13, verse 2. And then that's when he begins the teaching about the destruction of Jerusalem and the marauding army that's going to come in and do great destruction to Jerusalem, destruction of the temple and so forth. Now, before that, you have Jesus still trying to get his disciples to understand what it really means to be a disciple. He's still trying to drive that home. What does it mean to be a disciple? Because the last thing that happens before chapter 13 opens up is the example of Jesus witnessing the offering of the widow. Remember that one? The widow's mite. We sometimes refer to it that way, the widow's offering. So that's the last thing that happens before chapter 13 opens up. And then in that same context, you have Jesus teaching about beware of the scribes. They seek to be known for their seat, for their dress, for their opulence, for the way that they behave, for their prayers. They seek to be known by all of that. And so in all of this context, what you have is in the city of Jerusalem, Jesus had already entered. He's in his last week there in Jerusalem, spends it there. And now here he is in chapter 4, the night before his arrest and his crucifixion. But 2 days before the Passover is when this statement is made in the opening of chapter 14, which is the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. So there's your context of what is about to take place, because they have to do this before the Passover. They've got to do it. And they need to do it undercover in some way, by stealth. They're going to have to figure out how to do this thing so that they don't do it in front of crowds, so that there's not this big crowd following Jesus. Because remember, there's this statement about if the crowd knows how we feel, then the crowd may come at us. They may really respond to that by, in a very violent way. So we don't want the crowds to know all of this. So they're looking for a way to arrest Jesus when nobody's around. And so here's the last night before Jesus is going to be arrested the next morning. And at this Passover meal, Judas is identified. Judas is identified as the betrayer, and it's discussed about him being actually carrying that out. Chapter 14, verse 10 through 11. He's actually the betrayer, and it talks about that there in chapter 14, 10, and 11. And then he institutes the Lord's Supper, and after the instituting of the Lord's Supper, Jesus is going to foretell the denials of Peter. So that's where we are, chapter 14, verses 26 through 21. This is where Jesus tells Peter, "You'll deny me 3 times before the rooster crows." So let's read 26 through 31. "And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said to them, 'You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered.'" Now that's a quote from Zechariah 13, verse 7, and the idea of striking the shepherd. The word strike carries with it violence. It carries with it this idea of violence. So the idea of striking is not just a slap or something like that. It is actually a striking down. The hint is very, very easily seen, I think, in the original language that they're going to kill. So the shepherd is killed. When the shepherd is struck down, then the sheep are going to scatter. So that's what Jesus is quoting there from Zechariah 13. "You will all fall away, for it's written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I'm raised up, I'll go before you to Galilee." So Jesus there is telling them about their getting back together at a time after the time when he's going to be struck down as the shepherd. He's going to be killed, and then there's going to be a time later when they'll be back together. So Peter says, "I'm not going to fall away." As a matter of fact, he says, "All of them may fall away," verse 29, "even though they all fall away, I will not." Verse 30, "And Jesus said to him, 'Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, 'If I must die with you, I will not deny you.' And they all said the same thing." Okay, so Jesus makes the statement that to Peter, after Peter's very bold statement. Peter's statement is so emphatic, it's so bold, so straightforward. All of these others may run away. All of them may be frightened. All of them may have no courage. But I have courage. Now what he's saying? I'll never leave you, no matter what happens. I will never leave you. I'll never run. I will not fall away. Verse 29. Jesus says, not only will you, but you're going to do it 3 times. And then Peter comes back emphatically again, denying that that's possible. That is impossible. There's just no way that's going to happen. Now, there's no doubt that Peter believed what he was saying. He believed it, didn't he? He believed the first time he said it. All of them may run. All of them may scatter, but I'm going to stay with you. He believed it the first time he said it. Jesus says, no, you are going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows in the morning. No. So he says again, emphatically, I will not. As a matter of fact, he says, if I must die with you, I will not deny you. That's pretty strong. Both of those statements by Peter are very strong. That's why ESV translates it, but he said emphatically. And then at the very first one, Peter said to him, even though they all fall away, I will not. If Greek was had all this punctuation, you probably would have an exclamation mark there. Peter believed that. Peter believed that he wouldn't do it, didn't he? The strength that he thought he didn't have. The confidence he had in himself, was misplaced. He wanted to hang in there. He wanted to do the right thing. So even when he's gathered at the fire and he's asked questions, didn't I see you with this Jesus? Weren't you one of his disciples? He wants to do right, doesn't he? I mean, is there any question that Peter wants to do right? But he didn't. Well, that's pretty tough, isn't it? That's pretty tough, because if there's anything in the Bible that talks of the frailty of humanity, probably the story of Peter right here is one of those. Because he had such confidence in himself that he didn't say it one time, he said it twice, and the second time seemed to be with even more passion and more oomph behind it when he said, I will die with you. I'll die with you. Now there's some proof to that. Now Mark doesn't say it, but the others say it, that Peter drew a sword when they came to arrest Jesus. Mark just says a disciple, I think. A disciple drew a sword. So the penalty, not the penalty, but the consequence of Peter drawing that sword on some soldiers could have possibly been what? What? Yeah, he could have been killed on the spot, because he's one little sword against these soldiers of the high priest. Say it again. You're going to be like treason. Oh yeah. It's that was a bad word. I should have said that. Yeah. Dale's observation is you'd be fighting against the hierarchy. So you pull that sword and you're making a statement, and they might as well just kill you on the spot. Now, when he swings that sword and actually cuts off the ear of the servant of the high priest, then he's really making his mark, literally. The penalty for that would have been death. I think they avoided that when Jesus put it back on. Remember that? I think they avoided that. Oh, okay, Peter, I'm going to save your life right here. We're going to put this here back on. It never happened, see? It never happened. So did Peter believe that? Sure he did. So at this moment of there needing to be action, at least from Peter's viewpoint, he took action. But when it came to something that wasn't military, or it came to something that wasn't physical, when it came to something that was going to put him under great scrutiny and maybe lead to him being arrested and death, who knows exactly what, I don't know exactly what the process was going to be. Had he identified himself as who he was? Was it just going to be that they're going to make fun of him, or they're going to turn him in? I don't know exactly what was going to happen there. But in the moment of need, when he thought the kingdom was about to be taken away from him, he drew that sword. But in a moment when he is fearful, he denies him 3 times. Courage is gone.
But they're all the disciples affirming that.
Yes.
So Peter was just the outspoken one. He one that would take the lead and something like that. But every one of them affirmed their loyalty to him.
They did, yes. And we have Peter's words recorded, and then the thing that really stands out here, as opposed to the rest of the disciples, what Mari says is that they all affirm that very same thing. It adds that they're in that text. And they all said that same thing. And yet, Jesus is the one that Peter's the one that Jesus said, you're going to deny me 3 times. So in this, what's going to happen next is when the rest comes, all the disciples are going to flee. They're all going to leave. Verse 50, if we get there tonight. But when Jesus is arrested and all this takes place, and there's this real skirmish going on, and Jesus stops everything and makes this statement, they all take off. They all flee. And so there tells you a little bit about their ability to do what they said they would do. They just couldn't do it.
Peter was considered to be a very rash person anyway. So when he drew that sword, that was sort of like a gut reaction, a spontaneous reaction. He didn't even think. Sure.
It seems that way, yes.
But when he was by that fire, then he had time to think and to see what all was going on. Then he got scared.
Mm-hmm.
You know, immediately he wasn't scared at first.
Yeah, he's standing there with the other 10, and he's standing there with Jesus when he draws the sword. When he's standing outside the gate, he's all alone.
I don't think they could understand and comprehend when this took place that Jesus was just going to conquer them and become king. That would be a part of it. It just turned the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Randy's point, I think what we've dealt with all along in the book of Mark is this very difficult task that Jesus has had to try to show the disciples the nature of the kingdom, the nature of a disciple, and the nature of the king of that kingdom. He was trying to show them that. And that's what Mark is really doing. And the Gospel of Mark is really about a king and a kingdom. That's what it's all about. And what do you look like as a subject in that kingdom? And as the disciples are on their way to this very Passover, Luke records that they were discussing who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. So here we are on the eve before Jesus' death, and they still don't grasp the nature of the king, the nature of the kingdom, or the nature of the disciple.
When we talk about every one of them affirmed their loyalty, at this time they did not have the spiritual strength as they would have after the death of Christ.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very good point. A lot of things are going to change once there is the empty tomb. Yeah, once the tomb is empty, then things are going to really change dramatically. Their minds, everything's going to change dramatically, very quickly after that.
After they received the Holy Spirit, it wasn't until then that they became whole, wasn't it? I mean, wasn't that time between the death and when they received the Holy Spirit at Pentecost? Time of prayer, I mean, they stood in supplication, they stayed with themselves, they prayed and they prayed and they prayed until that time, until the Holy Spirit came upon.
Yeah, the 40 days after his resurrection until he ascended back into heaven, there was a lot going on during those 40 days that would help build them and change their minds. And a part of that was Jesus appearing to them in that resurrected body. The other part of that is the last appearance that we have before he takes them outside the city of Jerusalem and ascends back into heaven is where John records the breakfast by the Sea of Galilee, where he calls them in from fishing. And so they have this little meal, and there he reinstates Peter. And then you have the statement about go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. That's going to be the last thing that he says I think in all three of those gospels that record that, very close to the end. But then when he ascends, 10 more days until the Holy Spirit comes. So they're in Jerusalem waiting for the power. So the power comes 10 days later while they're waiting in Jerusalem, and it comes on Pentecost. I think that did not aid them in doing the right thing or living right. I don't think that was any aid in doing the right thing or living right. I don't think it helped their boldness. I think once they preached the gospel, then they saw what needed to be done. That would be unfair, I think, if they had boldness through the Holy Spirit. I didn't get it.
I'm kind of the belief that Peter wasn't aiming for his ear.
Oh, no. Yeah,
He was aiming for his head,
yeah.
I believe.
I think that Malchus ducked and he got that ear. Yep. All right, so we've looked all the way through verse 31, and then it moves from there to the prayer in Gethsemane. Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. This also, we really highlight, a lot of times we highlight Jesus praying and Jesus' prayer and his sweat becoming his drops of blood and his prayer to let this cup pass from me if there's any other way. But this section is also about the disciples. It's also about weakness. It is also about Jesus trying to help them understand their weakness, I think, because he comes back 3 times. I don't think that's any accident. I think he came back the 3 times for emphasis and for observation and to try to help teach them a lesson, because every time when he comes back, it is always the same teaching moment that he gives them. Look at 32, and it goes all the way through 42. And they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." And he took with him Peter, James, and John, and began to be greatly distressed and troubled. And he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch." And going a little farther, he fell on the ground and prayed that if it is possible, the hour might pass from him. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Remove this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." And he came and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, "Simon, are you asleep? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." See the teaching to Peter? That you might not be, and that you understand that the flesh is willing, but the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Remember what he just said about Peter? "I'll never deny you. I'll die with you." And here he's saying, you fall into temptation. You be aware that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And again he went away and prayed, saying the same words. And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were very heavy, and they did not know what to answer him. And he came the 3rd time and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and taking your rest? It is enough. The hour is come. The Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." I think probably Gethsemane is one of those places that Jesus went to on occasion, often, very possibly, a place of solitude, a place where he could get away. So he takes the disciples there, and you're familiar with the story. He leaves the disciples and takes Peter, James, and John a little further, leaves them, goes a little further into the garden. But before he leaves Peter, James, and John, what does he say to them? What does he tell them?
Watch. He's saying, watch out.
That he does, but as he leaves them, he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death." And then he's going to say, "You stay here and watch." Okay. So what's he revealing there in those few words? English Standard says, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death." What's he revealing there?
His human side.
And he's expressing his humanity concerning what? Yeah, what's about to happen is death. Yeah.
Well, how he's gonna die.
Yeah, and it's not just death. You know, it's one thing just to have your head chopped off, or or to have a bullet to the brain, but to die by crucifixion, and he knew that, was a whole different thing indeed.
I believe this time, Satan was very active at this time. I think probably
Sure.
more so than any time in history.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wanted Christ to fail. And he put on him the burden of all now, at that time, time past,
Mm-hmm.
the future, as far as being a Christian and inherit what God had promised. And so, at this time, the weight on Christ that he had to go through, I think, he was near death, and when you look at the apostles that he carried with him, Peter, Andrew, and James, the others may not have been able to bear what they saw. And so,
Yeah, good
so
point.
this was a very great time, I guess, for us.
Yeah.
For history.
Exactly, because this whole scene, as it unfolds, one of the things Jesus is asking is, I don't want to have to go through this, so if you've got another way, take it away from me. When he had done that 3 times, he had his answer. And so, yes, it all unfolds, and I agree with Mari's statement about Satan, I think, being instrumental in the pressure that's being put on Jesus here, maybe bringing to a reality what it's. Jesus didn't need to be reminded, because he knew that he was going to die for the sins of the whole world. But you've got this whole tense moment.
I really think Satan understood Christ is dead, his resurrection. I believe he used force. And if he let it go through, then that would finish him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. And he couldn't stop it, but that didn't keep him from trying to. Just like with us, he may not be able to stop us, but he's still going to try.
Besides knowing he was going to die a terrible death, also, don't you think part of it was in his mind was, and you said something about the sins, he was going to have to bear all those sins, and he knew that his father could not look upon sin, and he was going to turn away from him for that moment.
Yeah, there's so many points about this scene that we break down and we look at it, and all of those are really good points, and it's just a gut-wrenching scene, isn't it? And it was for Jesus. It was one of those moments that was just gut-wrenching.
But I'm gonna ask a question, because I believe I know, but I'm not sure 100%. Didn't Jesus have the power to stop it if he wanted to? Or do you think that God didn't let him have that power, as far as that? Because the Bible says they could have called legions of angels and destroyed the whole world, correct?
Yeah.
So Jesus could have stopped it if he, I think Jesus could have stopped it if he wanted. I don't know what you think.
I think yes, but he's going to do the will of the Father. I came not to do my will, but the will of the Father. We sing he could have called 10,000 angels. That idea is, I think, one that we believe that he had that power, but I think he had surrendered that to the will of his Father. If it didn't go through, it was going to be because the Father said, "Okay, stop it."
If Jesus would have stopped it, then Satan would have won.
Yeah, Satan would have won. Yeah.
And none of us could have been saved. There'd been no way.
I think, looking at, Luke's account, when Jesus, they were out there to arrest him, Jesus said to the chief priests and the officers of the temple and elders who had come against him, this is in verse 52 of Luke 22.
Have you come out with swords and clubs as you would against a robber? While I was with you daily in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this hour and the power of darkness is your power of darkness, which is Satan, is involved in this, and putting him to death. Now, I don't think Satan did know the power of what this was going to do. I think it's just within Satan's natural instinct that he just had to do evil no matter what he did.
Let's kill him, yeah.
Yeah, and I personally think that he probably did not know. There's a passage over in First or Second Corinthians 1 or 2 talks about the fact that had the princes of this world known that we would crucify Christ. Well, there's the greatest prince of this world, that's Satan.
Satan, yes.
I mean, that's my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is my view about it. Satan might have known all about the death, burial, and resurrection, but I don't think he did. I don't think he understood the process either. I think God kept all that secret.
Right.
Matter of fact, the angels, in fact, 1 Peter, 2 Peter 1, talks about the fact the angels even desired to look at
yes.
the prophecies concerning certain Christ. They didn't understand. So the angels, even including Satan, couldn't figure it out. And, that's one of the reasons God wrote it like he did. You don't tell your enemy your secrets.
You don't give him your plan, yeah.
He didn't know.
Right.
He understood it until after it happened, and boy, did I blow it. So it's just some thoughts on that about it.
Yeah, good observations. So what we see then is the struggle that Jesus is having. He is burdened, and he describes the intensity and the weight of that burden. There is the concern for his disciples when he goes back to them each time. There seems to be this calling of them to be alert and to be awake and to be watching. And part of that is so that they will be aware of their weaknesses. He calls attention to that and does that all three of those times that he comes back to them. And as that concludes, the very important and significant part of that is when he closes it out, when he says, let us be going, my betrayer is at hand. Judas is here. Not betrayers, but my betrayer, the one who has betrayed me is here. So that Gethsemane story, quite, I think, magnificent, heart, gut-wrenching account of Jesus only a short time before he's arrested. All right, any other comments?
Going on there, when it talks about being fair to God, if it be all possible, well, we come back and say, everything's possible with God. Well, why wasn't this possible? Simply because a human being had fallen into such a state that this was the only thing that he could do for salvation. And so he had to sacrifice his son to redeem man. And so that was the only possible thing that God could do.
Exactly. Yeah. There's an old joke. It goes around. Is there anything God can't do? No. Well, yes, there is. He can't lie. He
Can't go against his character.
He can't go.
Required.
Yeah.
Love required this.
Yeah. The cost or the price of sin was the perfect sacrifice, and this is the only perfect sacrifice. There wasn't another choice.
In John, it's, I think I can just paraphrase. It says that he knew that I was to come. He said, I know my Father could save me from this, but I know it will draw all men unto me. So that was his main objective, knowing that it would draw through his death, all men would be drawn unto his Father.
Yeah, great observation. The lifting up of Jesus on the cross would be the method by which men would be drawn to God. Yeah. Great observation. I think our time is really up. I think we'll just hold off on chapter 14:43, which is the arrest of Jesus, verse 43. So if you want to finish, you want to read that, study some of that, we'll be in verse 43 and following for next week. Thank you for your comments.